we're following the breaking news of the 5 soldiers shot today at Fort Stewart in southeastern Georgia, an Army base about 40 miles outside Savannah, a community of more than 10,000 people. All 5 victims right now are in the hospital, but Fort Stewart officials shared this afternoon that all 5 are in stable condition and all 5 are expected to recover, thankfully. Officials identified the suspected shooter as 28-year-old U.S. Army Sergeant Cornelius Radford, whom they say opened fire at his place of work with a personal weapon.
Soldiers in the area that witnessed the shooting immediately and without hesitation tackled the soldier, subdued him, that allowed law enforcement to then take him into custody.
That was Brigadier General John Lubis at Fort Stewart. Here's what else we know about how exactly the events unfolded this morning. Just before 11 a.m., we're told law enforcement was dispatched to the possible shooting at Fort Stewart. 8 minutes later, at 11:04, the base was locked down. At 11:09, emergency personnel were sent in to treat at least 5 soldiers shot. They were treated on the base before being sent to the hospitals. By 11:35 a.m., the shooter had been apprehended. 35 minutes later, the lockdown on the main containment area was lifted. I want to bring in CNN's Isabel Rosales. And Isabel, where is the suspect right now, and what do we know about him?
Jake, good evening. He is in pre-trial confinement awaiting a charging decision. This is according to the general there of the base. He's awaiting that charging decision by the Office of the Special Trial Counsel. He has also been interviewed, by the Army Criminal Investigation Division, although it's not clear if he's actually talking to military investigators, if he's being cooperative. Now, we know that he is an active duty soldier assigned to Fort Stewart's 2nd Brigade Combat Team. He is from Jacksonville, Florida, and we know from the Army that he joined back in January of 2018 as an automated logistical specialist. And back in May, he was arrested during a traffic stop that happened off base, and that was for driving under the influence. Now, we heard from the Brigadier General there that the suspected shooter's chain of command was not aware of this DUI, of this arrest, until the shooting happened, and they started to look up his information in the law enforcement database. The general also mentioned that Radford has no combat history, nor did he have any behavioral background that they were aware of. Now, as you mentioned, Jake, this is a workplace shooting. He knew these people. These were his colleagues. Critical here, the general mentioned that this was a personal gun that he brought in. So this was not a military weapon that was used in this shooting. This was his own personal gun. They're investigating how he got that onto base.
And Isabel, the general said that luckily all the soldiers that have been shot are expected to recover. How are they doing? What more do we know about their condition, if anything?
Yeah, it's such great news that we heard in the midst of all of this, that the 5 soldiers who were shot, they are in stable condition. They're expected to recover. So this was a total of 5 soldiers. 3 out of the 5 required surgery. 2 of them have been moved over to a Trauma 1 center in Savannah. But again, all of them are expected to survive. They'll be okay.
Isabel Rosales, thanks so much. Let's discuss this with CNN security correspondent Josh Campbell, as well as Jason Armstrong, the former police chief of Ferguson, Missouri. Josh, are there rules about what weapons you're allowed to bring with you on an Army base?
Yeah, firearms are highly regulated. In fact, but for a select group, including law enforcement, you're essentially unable to lawfully carry a firearm on a military base. In certain installations, including this one here, Fort Stewart, if a soldier brings a personal firearm on base, it has to be registered with the installation and then securely stored. You can't just carry it around with you around the base. Of course, that appears to be one of the weakest links here, is that because the individual had authorized access to the base, he was then able to come on and bring that without being searched. I know there will be people who say, well, why don't you search every vehicle before they actually get on the installation? For those who have been to a military base, particularly during rush hour, I mean, you have cars lined up for blocks sometimes. So I don't think that's actually realistic. That's just the threat here potentially, and that's why the military employs other means to try to detect insider threats, Jake.
Chief Armstrong, we know that the suspect's in custody and that he was tackled and subdued by soldiers. What does this tell you about how this might have played out?
What it tells me is the individuals that were involved, they were all in the same area. Potentially, they all worked together. And so whatever led this individual to make the decision to pull the weapon out and to start shooting individuals, one, it was either related to an altercation or something that was sparked in the moment, and this was an act that was just in the moment, or it was something where this individual had a long-standing challenge or problem with somebody there, and things escalated to where they felt the need to bring a weapon into that space and wanted to carry this out.
And Josh, you're still an officer in the military reserve. What does the U.S. military do to try to prevent and stop incidents like these? Obviously, this is not as bad as the Fort Hood shooting we all remember from years ago, but it could have really, it's bad enough, but it could have even been much worse.
Yeah, absolutely. But for those soldiers subduing this person, you can only imagine how worse this could have been. To your question about what the military does, there's physical security. Anyone who goes up to a base, you roll up at the ACP, the access control point. You have military police that are there controlling access. But again, we're talking about an individual who had authorized access to be on the base. And that's why the military regularly trains people and reinforces the training on trying to look for warning signs about potential insider threats. And that includes, you have a colleague, a friend in the military, you start to notice that there's something off about them. Maybe they're having, different struggles financially or personally. And the goal with that training is to sensitize people that, look, you don't just sit on that information, which is why it's going to be very interesting and important here for investigators with Army CID to actually interview people in the shooter's orbit, his friends, his colleagues, any of the victims, to determine whether or not, they had some type of beef with him. And so, again, that's what they try to sensitize the soldiers to, that, look, it's incumbent on everyone, if you see someone who is struggling, to speak up, the goal being to try to prevent something like this.
Chief Armstrong, what kind of information do you think law enforcement is working to get out of the suspect right now?
The number one question that they're trying to answer is, why did this happen and how did it happen? Whenever you have an incident like this, there are going to be a lot of questions that people on the base and people in the community are going to want answers to. And you're trying to figure out what contributed to this, because the number one thing that you want to do on the other side of it is to try to ensure that this doesn't happen again. So they're going to be looking at how this happened, how he got the weapon in there, why the checks and balances that they had in place failed in this instance, so they can put things in place to try to prevent this from happening again.
And Josh, while the motive remains unclear and under investigation, I'm curious your thoughts as to how investigators are working to figure that out right now. Obviously, they're interrogating the suspect. Beyond that, what else?
Yeah, we're not talking about someone just firing upon one person. And so, it appears this could have been, indiscriminate firing. So there will be that question. What was the motivation? Was this some type of a situation between this individual and a group? Were there other stressors that this person was then acting upon? It's interesting. The FBI has gone back and studied past mass shooters, the famed FBI profilers. They found certain commonalities, and that is that most people in these situations, they don't just snap one day and then start to engage in violence, but they go along this pathway and become more and more working toward that violent effort. And a lot of times, in most of these situations, the profilers have found they do exhibit those warning signs. And so that will be what is critical here, to try to determine what was the shooter going through in his life that then, resulted in this. Interestingly, our colleague John Miller reported that back in May, the suspect was arrested by local law enforcement, it appears off base, for driving while under the influence. It appears that information did not actually get to the military, because a brigadier general who spoke just a short time ago said that they weren't aware of that past contact. And so there was this question, were there things that were spiraling in his life, to include now running up against the U.S. criminal justice system? All those big questions for investigators as they try to piece together the why.
Well, you mentioned the U.S. criminal justice system, Josh, and I'm wondering on that. Obviously the military has its own uniform code of justice. Yeah. Is he ultimately just going to be handed over to local law enforcement, whether the sheriff's department or the police department? Or is there some way that the military will handle this? Yeah,
and when I said that, I meant the DUI off base would be handled by the regular U.S. criminal justice system. But he's now in the military justice system, which falls under what they call the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The military has its own justice department and its own prosecutors, its own courts, for example. And that is where he will be likely, I assume he will be tried here, obviously for attempted murder, it appears. And, obviously the military can convict people and confine people just like the U.S. Justice Department could as well. And so he certainly faces very, very serious consequences.